The rabbit hole is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, health, tax, or financial advice. The program's participants are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from acting on the information contained within this program. All discussions and disclosures are part of the public record. We ask that listeners respect the privacy of the individuals participating or named in each episode. Thank you.
Welcome to the Rabbit Hole podcast.
Down the rabbit hole we go.
Welcome to the Rabbit Hole with your hosts Marty and Andy.
We begin in
5, 4, 3, 2.
Today's episode was the jumping off point for our newest venture. The Rabbit Hole is in production on a new documentary series that will be launching very soon. In this limited series, we share our experience and finally put all of the evidence in a visual format that exposes the deep-rooted issues and systemic corruption within our state's regulatory systems. Today's episode will feature some snippets of that footage if you have the ability to view on your favorite streaming platform. Let's get into it.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do some updates. One of the updates is we did our first, I'll call it a rough draft recording for a new segment we're going to call Tuesdays with Todd. And Todd is a longtime friend, and he is a historian. He works in academia, and he's going to talk a little bit about what was, for, in a different frame, corporatocracy. And we recorded. It was a lot of fun. I think it'll be a really cool segment if you're into history. And you also, the thing I like about it is what he's done over the years is he was always able to look at something that's happening now and relate it back to the history, to the foundation of like, what happened to allow for this, or how did this, and what happened in the past, and what did they do to fix the things?
Well, I love it too, because for me, it made the culture of Virginia make more sense to me. Growing up in the Northeast, I approach things in a totally different way. I have a different cadence. The way I speak is different. I like things, quick. I don't do a lot of the niceties in my conversation. He really goes into how your background affects how you interact on a personal level in modern times too, which I thought was very cool, very interesting. Gives us a little bit of a break from all the heavy, and it was fun to talk about. So I can't wait to get started with that.
Yeah, and I will say, if you can remember this, I had one assumption about kind of the history of Virginia and how it ties into the culture today, and I think I was spot on. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of fun for me, but it explains a lot. And anyways, going back and having that perspective, it just gives you perspective.
It does, and it always helps to know, how our ancestry might play in modern times, right? It's this cycle of life where things move in this circular pattern, even in the case of the regulation here, it's like you can either go to really heavy regulation and then you have less problems on the other side, but it makes business difficult, or you can have very loose regulation, and then eventually that loose regulation will lead to the degradation of the things being built, and it causes another cycle of problems. So it's this cycle of ups and downs, and understanding ourselves really helps us to avoid the pitfalls, so that at least this next cycle might be, swirling upwards instead of what we've experienced during COVID and the breakdown with the construction industry. So,
yeah, the one thing that jumped out for me that I was like kind of real time trying to process was because he's known our story. I mean, not the nitty gritty. We don't just walk around talking about this all the time. But he knew some of the background. He's familiar with it. But when we went into the details, he couldn't quite understand how that was legal, how contract law could be ignored. And this is a guy who's coming from New York State. They're under Kathy Hochul. And I'm like, if you're thinking, well, Republicans, this is good for the Republican side to be loose on regulation, I'm telling you what you're doing is you're teeing up an easy win for a Democrat to come in and say, we need some order and
absolutely. Well, that's the cultural differences, right? So he's in a very liberal state, so highly regulated. Their life has maintained a certain level of, I guess, sameness. You don't have the waves and the ups and downs economically. It's more stable, either up or down. You can get into that too. But the regulatory wise, very stable. Everything's checked over a lot. You have to make sure that you are hitting all of these checks and balances. Whereas here, we don't have that. So in his opinion, all we had to do was just, well, that's what the contract is for, right? Well, you would think so. You would. But the contract has a ton of loopholes and a ton of blocks, and you have to be careful. Is this falling into the right category? There's a lot more to it here because we have looser regulation.
That's why it's hard to explain, because it's this kind of nondescript loop. It's not even a loop because it can fragment off in other areas, but it's this kind of fluid vacuum where the rules can kind of change and be interpreted. So they can change real time. It isn't like there's a law and you have to follow it. Well, what if somebody changes their mind based on opinion for one individual based on the moment?
So that's the difference there, right? If you're in the Northeast, there are so many levels of government and regulation that there's always another level that you can hit. You could say, oh, well, if you can't help me, can I speak to your supervisor? Let's say that there's so many steps up that ladder of supervisor and regulatory oversight that you have additional places to go until you get a resolution. Here, I had DPOR and then a civil lawsuit. And when DPOR messed up and I said, oh my gosh, you guys have really botched my case, I need it reviewed. My only option is the Secretary of Labor and then the governor. That's it. That's it.
Right.
So I can't say, hey, can we do a review of this process? Because you guys missed a few things. And I don't know if you're aware, but you also did some things wrong. Can we review this? No, you have to get almost to the governor to get someone to check into all the things that went wrong.
And it's fortunate that, I'll say I don't give up, but my wife really doesn't give up. And so now we're understanding, oh, this is what we have to do.
Right.
So that's what we're doing. But it's beyond our little situation. Why it matters for everybody else is a couple things. We talked a little bit about the corruption of our county and how it's referred to apparently as Arrest-a-Field instead of Chesterfield. So beyond that, there's also just the validity of contract law. Because my takeaway is I don't trust any contract in Virginia. So I'm less interested in engaging in commerce, because even if there is a law, what I've seen is there can be breaches in a contract, but a quasi-regulatory authority can say no harm, no foul, don't worry. And now we're going to block anybody else from getting resolution for that same violation.
Right. So I don't know if you guys have missed it, but I did do a live stream where I went through a document we pulled during the Freedom of Information request. And that process is not complete, but I got this one document that basically stated that the investigator found a confirmed contract violation during the course of our investigation. And instead of telling me or reporting it for the hearing so that there could be some sort of due process. I know it's not a courtroom, but some sort of due process. Instead, she gave our contractor a paragraph to sign that was already pre-filled that basically stated, we found you to be in violation. If you want to be compliant, then you sign this paragraph. And not only will we not sanction you for this offense, any other offense you committed up until this point will not be sanctionable. So imagine that. Yeah. Imagine having a binding contract and you reporting it to the regulatory board for breach of contract and other issues, them finding, yes, indeed, you're correct. There is a breach of contract. We're going to now absolve him before the hearing. Because that's in essence what happened.
And further, they don't absolve everybody. They made the point to he was particularly helpful and transparent. And we're going to go through the file. Yeah, we're going to go through the files and show how over and over again he's telling them things that are blatantly not true.
We're going to do a little today.
Yeah,
we're going to do a little today. So
But-
I'm not even going to lay that up because we're going to get into that right now. But yes, she did. She told him,
We don't do this for everybody.
we don't do this for every contractor. And that is verbatim. You can go and watch that live stream and see me break it down. I put the actual document and the communication and the contractor's response on the screen. So you can watch it live on YouTube. And you can see for yourself that I'm not making this up. It really is that greasy of a process that you can't hold someone down to their contract.
And as a contractor, let's say your lineage doesn't trace back that far in Virginia, or maybe you don't have the right contacts. Well, you're not going to be afforded the same kind of option
That's my question.
for the same exact offense.
Yes. How do you decide who is worthy of compliance and who is not? So I just start referring to it as a magical paragraph for a special boy, because that's basically what it boils down to. We like you. You're special. You fit into our category of what we want to see in Virginia. So you get magical beans or paragraphs that absolve you from any wrongdoing. But is that the case for the little guy? Because I've also heard a ton of stories of how DPOR has made it really difficult for the smaller guy to do business, which sounds very much like corporatocracy to me, in my opinion. If you're only interested in companies that are operating in the millions of dollars, you want to protect those rights, but not necessarily the little guy who makes 50 grand a year on the side to supplement his family's income.
It's almost
He gets
like
fines.
Yeah, it's almost like imagine if somebody said, we're going to allow a chain restaurant to stay open in a health crisis, but a independently owned store, we've got to close that down because of the health risk. And you say, well, wait a minute, it's the same square footage, it's the same service, it's the same risk, the same issues. Yes, but this large entity is essential. The small independent business owner is not.
Right.
These contractors, some are essential, some are not. Same crime, same violation.
Well, let's extend that, right? Like in our case, this contractor was deemed essential. So there were no sanctions on his business throughout the COVID process. He was allowed to operate without any kind of regulatory issues. I think we had some stay-at-home orders, but essential businesses like contracting were allowed to operate, right? So during the course of the home building, my house was empty. He had, 10 months. No regulatory issues with building throughout the pandemic, because we built before those shortages really kicked off in 2021. We were already in our house. So this was just when it was stay-at-home orders. He was allowed to remain open. So no penalty for him because he's essential, which was a privilege during COVID. Imagine the entitlement that you were allowed to continue your business while other people had to shut theirs down because there was a national pandemic. You took that time not to be respectful of your customers and make sure that their products were being completed the way that you contracted them. No, there was a feeding frenzy for houses, and you just kept signing contract after contract after contract, and you overextended. And as a result, the 30 or 40 families that you already had waiting for you to finish their homes, you pushed them aside because there was new money coming in. And now you're claiming COVID as the reason why you screwed over those 30 to 40 families.
How many people have had bad experiences, but they're within this 1 year punch down period? So they don't want to say anything because they really just want to get some of the work done that the builder is obligated to do. And they know at a certain date, they're just going to ghost them.
Yeah.
So more people don't talk. And then you'll have other people, you'll have reviews posted. They disappear. We had that happen to us. It went away. You had 10,000 hits on your Google review?
Yep.
It's gone.
Google it's funny because Google had actually thanked me for my review. The fact that I had submitted photos and had outlined it so clearly and brought them so much traffic. And then suddenly one day it evaporates.
Right.
So.
And that's kind of, I think, where we need to pivot, because it's not about the one builder. At least people are complaining about their builders. We're not operating in a vacuum. There is an infrastructure of oversight that needs to exist and does exist. It's about drawing attention to that.
So let's get into a little bit about what it can talk about, which is the DPOR situation, right? So every time I get a new FOIA request, I'm finding new documentation and more reasons to be just horrified about how my case was handled. I don't know how you feel about it, but it pings me out of my sleep at night because it's such an obvious thing and they couldn't get it together, and it's all documented. Just to give you one concrete example, we filed our case with DPOR. The investigator asked our builder for a list of subcontractors. There was a subcontractor listed as Laser Construction, and supposedly, based off of the invoices for what they were paid for, they did the framing on our house. Now, my house was framed in May of 2020. DPOR listed the license number for that subcontractor in their investigative documentation. And the name is similar. The name of that company legally is Laser, spelled LASR, Construction Services, LLC. That company is a Class A contractor. That company has the same address as my builder. And that made me go, what? Like, that's weird. That initial certification date for that Class A contractor is May 9th of 2022. So that's the first day that contractor should have been doing work legally in the state, was May of 2022. I was already in my house for like a year and a half at that point. They didn't frame my house. So then I did a little more research and I'm like, who could this be? Well, if you do another search and you just leave it as Laser, you find out that there's no other company in the DPOR license bank that says Laser. So I called up.
Yeah, the only one I'm showing is a Laser Services, Laser Construction Services LLC. That's the one that we saw.
Okay,
so that's the same one. Yeah, because I do see where it was another application before that one for just a laser construction. But they didn't finish up the process, and it looks like it was Lionel. Lionel was applying for what's called a sole proprietorship. He wanted a company in his name, but it didn't go through. So it looks like he just teamed up with this other gentleman, and they came up with Laser Construction Services LLC.
What I want to understand, though, is that something, because I've seen so many things where DPOR will go, well, no harm, no foul, said he won't do it anymore. Is that a situation, is that permissible? Because it's so crazy to me that what I've seen, is it permissible to say, I now own this entity, it's a new entity, it's licensed now, I'm not responsible for the unlicensed contracting that I subbed out to them because now it's licensed, even though it's a different entity and it happened 2.5 years later. Does Virginia say that that's okay? Because somebody has a license, even though
it would be like me assuming someone else's life. Yeah, that way you assume the customer, you assume the name recognition, you assume all of the connections and I'm sure it's a small community here, so I'm sure everyone knows what happened, except for the customers and except for DPOR who regulates. Because why would they know anything?
What I'm wondering too, though, is so that would absolve him for the work that was.
Hold on, because there's more, right? So I wanted to be sure. I was like, here you have this thing that's so poorly audited that you put the wrong company as responsible for the framing in my home. So that's a huge mistake, DPOR. To me, that's a mistrial if we were in a court of law, right? Because you're using somebody else as, the framer in a case. You can't do that. So you're basing the validity of my home or the integrity of my home on a company that didn't exist when my home was built. That's ridiculous. So I wanted to make sure I'm not missing anything because I want to be thorough and I want to be fair. Because how does this happen? I don't know. So I went to Chesterfield County, their website specifically, and I was like, is there any way you could operate in Chesterfield County without being licensed and insured? Because Virginia prides themselves on only allowing licensed and insured work, right? Insured, I'm not 100% on, but licensed. You have to be licensed to do work. And it used to be $5,000 or more, which made me feel more comfortable with the regulatory system. Now it's 20. I don't like that as much, but you had to be licensed to do the work in the state. So I'm like, maybe there's a Chesterfield County loophole, because who knows? So I contacted Chesterfield County. Now in Chesterfield County, there is a kind of loophole, right? So if you have an unlicensed contractor trying to do work, they can like basically file a business license classification affidavit where they basically say they're I guess qualified to do the work, and Chesterfield might accept that in some circumstances as a license, quote unquote. So there's an affidavit you can sign and still legally do work in Chesterfield County if you're not licensed, or if you're missing an SEC classification. So it's a very weird loophole, but I contacted Chesterfield County. Does that make sense?
I mean, it's a
lot, right?
It makes sense. It doesn't make good policy. But
well, I contacted Chesterfield County, and the weirdness of the response was I got an email that said, you can call me at this number. And I spoke to a certain person. They are responsible for these types of inquiries. And she said, I can speak to you on the phone. I can only answer yes or no. And I cannot offer you any additional information. And I was like, are you kidding? Are you serious? Yes or no? You have to ask the question. I cannot give you additional information. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. What are we in? Like, I have to be like Charlie's Angels over here. Like
Chesterfield County?
Right. So I'm asking this lady, I'm like, how many ways can I ask? Is this legal? And I'm like, do they have a license? Are they licensed? Are they legally able to do? And every response was no. So I felt pretty confident that the original company that worked on my house was not licensed or legally doing work in the state. So then I go to Facebook, right? And you can look them up. They have a history going all the way back to 2017 that I could find. Right? The poster child on that website is always our builder. Like their house wrap is branded because they're fancy. And it's in every stinking picture, pretty much. So I'm like, oh, they have a relationship. That makes sense. So he knew this person was doing work with this person, if you look on Facebook, since 2017, at least. So you didn't check for all those houses if he was licensed? Because you've been doing work with this guy since 2017 that I can see, probably longer. So you either knew this whole time he wasn't licensed, or you didn't check. And you didn't feel the obligation to check. Because guess what? All the other builders around here use them too. They're in the pictures too. So I took that to DPOR and I told them, ask me what happened.
So refresh my memory, but each one of those offenses, when you use a unlicensed contractor over the threshold, the dollar amount threshold allowed, that's a misdemeanor. Correct? Right. And there's a fine, and is there potential prison?
I don't know if there's prison.
Okay.
Because I haven't looked into it, because I don't want to. Who wants to take something like this to the cops?
I don't.
So I didn't. Yeah. But I don't know what the penalty would be. But I think there is like up to a year in prison and then monetary damages. But they can also not put you in prison, just fine you.
Yeah. So
as I understand it.
So if this company's been operating or was operating for, say, 6 or 7 years, unlicensed, then all those builders that use them and went over that dollar amount threshold could be subject to those misdemeanors. Except
for the fact that there's a statute of limitations. So you only have 3 years.
If you commit, let's say, a couple dozen misdemeanors and you violate all these provisions of being a licensed contractor, even though you can't get sued for it because the clock ran out, nobody caught you. If they find out after the fact, does DPOR say, wait a minute, for years you operated incorrectly.
There's still a statute of limitations.
So even the regulatory would be like, nah, no harm, no foul.
Right. I told them.
You ran out the clock.
So I told you to ask me what happened when I told them.
Right.
Because I printed all of this out and I gave it to DPOR. And this is a regulatory board. So they should be able to look. I still explained it.
Yeah.
And they should be able to look and see it. And you know what they told me? They were like, you already reported something else. So, so res judicata and estoppel, which I asked them repeatedly to show me how that applies in my case. And I could not get an answer except for they gave me my answer. That's how they responded to me over and over and over again. So it's ridiculous. I'm not retrying someone for a crime. I'm telling you that you are listing the incorrect company as the company responsible for the build in my home. So yes, this company is licensed, but the person who framed my house is not. And you are so indignant that you're just like, I don't care. I'm not gonna investigate it. And they took all that information, they added it to my file underneath everything else and didn't allow that to be put before the board. So now from now until forever, I can't submit that information to the board and protect anyone else because they're saying it applied to my case and it was blocked. So they buried that. So rather than alert my neighbors, the other commercial buildings who have been framed by this company, rather than tell the insurance companies who, if one of these houses flops over, you think insurance should be held responsible for that work? No, DPOR didn't tell anybody.
Well, beyond that, you're harming, based on our experience, if it's poor workmanship and they can find it, your builder just did a terrible job, then insurance isn't going to cover you. So that means that by not informing the public, by having this information and the regulatory board deciding they're going to conceal it, they've put the general public at risk because this is, I don't know how many homes in our neighborhood alone, but you're talking about, you're right. You're talking about, I don't know, it could be hundreds of homes.
Yeah, because it's not just our builder.
I would make the claim that, in my opinion, DPOR is aiding and abetting in law breaking and regulation breaking and contract breaking. They're aiding and abetting. They served as a buffer of accountability.
In your opinion? In
my opinion, and simply ran out the clock. And when we asked them if they had our evidence, what did they say? We gave it to them digitally and hard copy.
Right. And I gave it to them in advance because I wanted it referenced to support my claims, right? So I gave them photographic evidence and they said they didn't have it and they didn't scan it into the file. But when I filed my FOIA request, it absolutely was scanned, perfect clarity. I made sure that all of those photographs were perfect and they would not submit not one. Our case had 9 documents at the IFF. One was, this is what really gets my goat too, is one was executive orders that the attorney from the opposing side decided to add to the record. Another document was an article unrelated to anything we were talking about, but about how hard COVID was on contractors.
I have a question.
Sure.
2 questions. So that executive order was from, is that Youngkin?
No.
Was it prior governor?
Northam. Yep.
Northam. Okay. So by doing that, then opposing counsel was essentially claiming that the governorship, or the governor's office, was essentially endorsing or okay with what they did because they used it as an example of policy to say what we've done here is okay.
Not only that, the builder said he was proud to have delivered the house to us in the timeline that he did.
Okay. So now the opposing counsel and by default, the builder is claiming that the governor's office is on board with their behavior.
Right.
1. 2, the COVID policies and restrictions and whatnot. Did he include the social media pics where during that same time they were having get-togethers unmasked?
No.
Okay. I find that curious.
Yeah.
Because I think what we found here, to me, is a situation where for the public good, you say, what's in it for you? We need laws that are upheld. We need credibility for the government because we're going to have to rely on it. We need an infrastructure. We can't run around and say, well, the rules change depending on who you are in whatever situation, because that's bad for everybody. So what we have to do now, because of this, is walk through. This was the first one. This was focused on laser focus. But from here, we're going to go through the FOIA. We're going to go through DPOR. and we're going to document, we're going to show and expose what we've seen and how our rights have been trampled as we update you on the progress of our case and all the other endeavors and issues and things that we're dealing with. We're going to go through with our lawsuit and everything, but this is a broken system and the public's at risk. And so it needs attention and it needs reform, period. But I mean, like, oh my God, we're going to have fun with it because like at a certain point you got to laugh or you cry. And it's like, look how absurd this person is. Look how absurd the system is that plays pretend right alongside.
That's the problem that I have with DPOR. There are certain rights that we had too during our trial that were not upheld, right? I asked them specifically, can I bring my attorney? And they were like, he can sit in the room because it's a public hearing, but he can't say anything. He can't object to anything. He can't offer a statement. So there's really no point in bringing your attorney. Well, later on, I go on their website and they're like, you can bring an attorney and you can have him handle the whole thing. What?
All this is in writing.
What?
All of it is in writing.
Yes. So I was totally denied. But I could have had my attorney handle the whole thing. Like, I want to spend a day doing this. Are you kidding me? So, yeah, I'm a little angry and salty about that.
Some stuff that's missing. And
before you totally end, that's the other thing. The FOIA shows that I sent them the email and I'm like, hey, you guys messed up on laser. So what they did was they were like, oh, we'll have the investigator check in on it. And the documents that she pulled, all she did was continually pull up our contractor, not even laser. She just kept continually pulling up our contractor over and over and filled up a paper as if she was searching to make sure that the correct contractor was listed.
Explain, I don't understand.
So I said, hey, you guys messed up. This laser is not the same laser that worked on my house. You put the wrong contractor in.
Right.
So they sent it back to the investigator and they were like, uh-oh, she's on to us or whatever. And Allegedly. No. What they said was, what does she want now? It's literally in the emails. It's hilarious. And then they were like, oh, no. And they sent it to the investigator. And the investigator just looked up our Class A contractor over and over again. Not laser.
Oh, so she just refused to look up that entity.
She didn't,
she didn't look that up at all. Identify it as not. Right.
So she just did several lookups of the umbrella company. So like the company that we actually hired that we thought was going to do all the work in the first place. She looked that company up, not the subcontractor.
Right.
And I get it. If there's an unlicensed sub, they have no power over the unlicensed sub. My point to her was not to go after the unlicensed sub even. Just acknowledge the fact that my contractor, one of the things he did wrong that we should be adding to the hearing is that he used an unlicensed subcontractor violation and add that to the docket and let the board for contractors decide if he violated it or not. Not go and regulate the subcontractor because that ship sailed. He's not doing business anymore. Who cares? Right? Just the guy I have a contract with. And that was too hard. So now you can end the episode.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be good. I think what the FOIA did for us is it gave us kind of a roadmap to follow so we can break through and say, this is where the law was violated. This is where our rights were violated. This is where lies were exchanged for truth, and then let you decide. We'll provide all the documents. We'll back up everything we're saying and then let the public decide. But ultimately at this point, I think we've identified a massive opportunity for reform and proper regulation and oversight. And this is an election year, and some things are going to change. Hopefully.
They will if I can help it. So that's it. So if you're out there and you're listening, this is, it's fun. It's cathartic for me and my husband, but we also kind of want to get the word out there and actually affect some change. So if you are on any socials, find us. We are Rabbit Hole Podcast, and that's Hole, WHOLE podcast on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, Facebook. Make sure that you follow, you subscribe, you like whatever it is you do out there on socials, and follow along with the podcast as well, because the more the numbers go up, the more change we can affect. But if everyone just kind of hides in the shadows, then no one knows that you're listening. And I know you are because I'm getting the phone calls. So definitely find us out there. Don't leave us hanging. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Right on.